In popular culture, Byzantium is often portrayed as an empire of wealth, splendor, and luxury. One of the most tangible manifestations of this image was the availability of exotic aromatic substances, which were used not only at the imperial court, but also in everyday products such as cosmetics. The presence of luxury aromatics on Byzantine market stemmed largely from the empire's strategic geographical position, which made Byzantium one of the principal commercial hubs of the medieval world and a getaway between the Mediterranean and the East. Imported aromatic substances attached the attention not only of merchants and the imperial elite, but also of Byzantine physicians, who employed them in both pharmacotherapy and cosmetology. Aromatics were particularly valued in the latter branch of medicine because they left the skin pleasantly scented. However, since such substances belong to the group of costly commodities, cosmetic preparations containing exotic scented ingredients were available only to the affluent customers. And since only they could regularly afford such preparations, the distinctive fragrance of such cosmetics may have functioned as an olfactory marker of wealth and social prestige to those who used them. In today's talk, we will examine the role of aromatic substances in cosmetics used in Byzantium for bodily hygiene. The main source for our presentation will be Aetius of Amida's Libri Medicinales. By analyzing selected prescriptions included in this treatise, we will examine both practical functions of these preparations and their social and economic significance within Byzantine society. Aetius of Amida was a 6th century Byzantine physician, the author of a 16-book medical encyclopaedia, Libri Medicinales. For the present talk, it is important that the work preserves a rich collection of cosmetic recipes requiring costly imported aromatics. The presence of this kind of prescriptions may suggest that Aetius was familiar with the needs and expectations of affluent members of Byzantine society. Some scholars even hypothesize that he was a court physician of Empress Theodora, the wife of Justinian the Great. Like other Byzantine medical compilations, Aetius's Libri Medicinales were largely based on the works of earlier medical authorities. Current scholarship, however, generally regards this treatise not as a mere repository of inherent knowledge, but as a carefully structured work reflecting the author's selective use, rearrangement, and occasional interpretation of earlier material in order to adapt it to the needs of his own practice. In the field of cosmetology, Aetius often referred to the authority of Titus Sallustius Crichton, a physician active at the turn of the 1st and the 2nd centuries AD. Crichton was the author of now lost treatise Cosmetica, which was a comprehensive collection of cosmetic recipes and practical instructions concerning their preparation and use. Appointed physician to the Emperor Trajan, he was undoubtedly familiar with the elite patterns of consumption and with preparations requiring costly ingredients. The importance of Crichton's treatise for our talk lies in the fact that Aetius included in his work several prescriptions which he attributes to Crichton and which are not preserved by any ancient or early Byzantine medical author. We might therefore suppose that Aetius had direct access to Cosmetica and use it when composing chapters devoted to cosmetics in his Libri Medicinales. For the purpose of our presentation, we will focus on 2 prescriptions of cosmetic preserved in Book 8 of Aetius's Encyclopedia. The first concerns the skin cleanser and the other a deodorant. The first preparation, so the cleanser, is known as Nimma prosopou eudokimon thaumasion, what we can translate as well-known and renowned facial cleanser. We don't know who the author of the recipe was. There is, however, a premise which tentatively allows us to link it with Crichton's Cosmetica. Namely, according to the information preserved by Galen of Pergamum, in his treatise, Crichton discussed a group of preparations called Nimmata prosopou. Therefore, if we assume that Aetius was indeed familiar with Crichton's work at first hand, it is possible that he borrowed the prescription from Cosmetica. The second cosmetic, so the deodorant, is called a Wodes prosenes, so a deodorant of mild action. In this case, the authorship of the recipe can be easily ascribed to Crichton, as it is noted by Aetius himself. The choice of these two prescriptions was motivated by several considerations. The first is that they provide relatively detailed instructions concerning their preparation, which suggests that they were intended to illustrate the method used in preparing other products of the same type. The second consideration concerns origin of two prescriptions. Given that the deodorant recipe was explicitly borrowed from Crichton's treatise, and that the Nimma prescription is also likely to be of ancient origin, both recipes testify to the continuity in the ancient cosmetic tradition in the Byzantine cosmetology. Finally, since both prescriptions require costly aromatic substances, their analysis allows us to draw some conclusions about intended recipients and of the preparations and interpret this information in the context of social and economic history of Byzantium. Let us start our talk with Nimma prosopou. The prescription for the preparation is embedded in Chapter 6, Book 8 of Libri Medicinales, entitled Smegmata prosopou kai stilbomata, that is, facial cleansers and cosmetics brightening the face skin. In the chapter's entry, we read that it contains recipes for preparations aimed at cleansing face from epichirismata, which in this context can be probably interpreted as kind of cosmetic preparations. This information brings in mind modern care procedures preparing the skin for evening regeneration, which require inter alia removing the makeup, cleansing the face, and applying a night cream. Given this analogy, we can presume that the preparations preserved in the chapter also were a part of broader hygienic procedures. The analysis of the prescriptions preserved in the chapter shows that Aetius distinguished two main categories of facial cleansing preparations. The first, which can be linked with modern scrubs, relied primarily on plant ingredients and cleansed the skin through mechanical exfoliation. The second, containing substances having chemical action, consisted of two groups. The first of them comprised complex preparations which contained a substance called sapon, sometimes additionally described by adjective gallic. Aetius does not define the term. However, we find some information on the substance in the writings by Aetius of Cappadocia, active in the 2nd century AD, who shortly describes Gallic sapon in his De Curatione Diuturnorum Morborum. As he explains to his readers, it is a substance formed into pills and acting in the manner comparable to nitron, which is probably sodium carbonate. And for this reason, it was used for cleansing both clothes and the body. This comparison suggests that such cosmetics may have owed at least part of their cleansing effectiveness to the physiochemical properties of sapon, which, when mixed with water, may have bound oils and greasy impurities, enabling this way their removal from the skin surface. The other group within this category is constituted by compound cosmetics containing nitron, or its form known as afronitron. The cleansing action of these preparations was probably based primarily on the chemical properties of nitron, which, when combined with water, help to break down and remove oily residues from the skin. While sapones and nitron including cleansers merit a separate discussion, the present analysis will focus on a mechanical cleanser, the already mentioned Pneuma prosopou eudokimon haumasium. The phrase Pneuma prosopou suggests that the cosmetic was primarily aimed to be applied on the face. However, from the further part of the text, we learn that it could also be used in order to wash the whole body. From the title, we learn that the prescription was well known and renowned for its effectiveness, and it was said to work wonders by making the skin brighter, smoother, tighter, and eliminating its roughness. So I don't know what is your impression, but to me, this description sounds very similar to the claims we encounter on modern cosmetics. So, some things never change. Well, as for the recipe itself, the cosmetic consisted of 1 ounce of mastic, frankincense, ammoniacon resin, and iris, respectively, 16 ounces of tragacant, 9 ounces of juice made from unripe grapes, and 10 ounces of melon seed with the moist inner parts of the fruit, 29 egg whites, and 5 kseste of finely ground wheat flour called semidalis. The dry ingredients were pounded and then mixed with the moist ones. The resultant mass was shaped into flat discs, which the author calls artiskoi, that is, small loaves, and they were left to dry, most probably in a shaded place, as we may assume from other prescriptions within the chapter. Next, they would be pounded and sieved, and the ready-to-use powdered preparation was stored in a glass vessel. Even though Aetius does not provide us with any details concerning how Pneuma should be applied, the prescriptions for mechanical scrubs within the chapter, as well as the term Pneuma itself, shed some light on this topic. First of all, in several recipes for mechanical scrubs, we find instructions that they should be used in a bathhouse, which suggests that their application required water. Moreover, some prescriptions state explicitly that the preparation should be dissolved in water and used with its addition. Another argument suggesting that the use of the discussed cosmetic required water is the origin of the noun pneuma, which derives from the verb nizo, meaning to wash or to wash off, which indicates a direct connection between the cosmetic and water. When it comes to application, we may suppose that a portion of pneuma was mixed with water to form a paste and then was rubbed into skin, face, and finally washed off. As for the cleansing action of the cosmetic, it seems that it was provided by its solid components, that is, melon seed coats, semidalis flour, mastic, frankincense, and iris. Most probably the recipe called for iris rhizome. After being pulverized and mixed with water, these ingredients gave the preparation a gritty texture, which when rubbed into the skin, removed residues of previously applied preparations and exfoliated the epidermis. The cosmetic also contained of a group of non-abrasive substances, namely ammoniacon resin, tragacant gum, and egg whites, whose role was no less important. Upon contact with water, the said components would have formed a viscous film-forming matrix, which most probably played several roles in the cosmetic. First, It may have moderated the abrasive action of the exfoliating ingredients by coating the skin with a protective film. Second, the film may have helped to reduce moisture loss from the skin, thereby contributing to its softening. Lastly, it bound the remaining ingredients into a homogeneous mass, ensuring the proper consistency of the preparation. Finally, one should emphasize that even though the author of the prescription does not mention it, the described cosmetic must have been distinguished by its fragrance, which it owed to its scented ingredients, that is, iris rhizome, mastic, and frankincense. All three had been valued since antiquity for their aromatic properties. Both mastic and iris served as primary ingredients in scented oils bearing their names. Both were also frequent components of fragrant oils made from other aromatic substances. When it comes to scented qualities of frankincense, Libri Medicinales suggests that it could have been used to aromatize cosmetic preparation, as well as medicaments. Among all three fragrant substances, only frankincense was obtained outside the Mediterranean, as it was imported to Byzantium from far-flung Arabia. The place of origin made it the most exotic and the most expensive aromatic, since the long-distance transportation of the resin must have contributed substantially to its final price on the Byzantine market. Mastic probably ranked second in value. Since it was produced only on Chios, its price also must have been relatively high. However, as the island is located in the Mediterranean, the transportation cost did not affect the price of the resin as considerably as in the case of frankincense. Iris was probably least expensive of the three aromatics, as it was widely available throughout the Mediterranean. Therefore, in light of the above discussion, we may presume that the cosmetic owed its luxurious character primarily to the inclusion of frankincense. It is possible that its fragrance constituted a dominant olfactory note of the preparation, immediately conveying an impression of luxury. Now, let us proceed to the next group of preparations, that is prescriptions for scented deodorants embedded in Chapter 7, Book 8. Its full beginning, according to the edition by Olivieri, reads Cataplasmata adherina evodian pojunta topanti somati critonos. There is Crichton's poultices providing the whole body with a pleasant scent in summer. The title itself is already problematic, as it suggests two issues which find no support in the text. First, that the whole chapter was authored by Crichton. Second, that it concerns cataplasms, that is, therapeutic poultices or dressings, not cosmetic preparations. The question of the term cataplasmata will be addressed in a moment. Now, without entering into the details, let us consider the problem of the chapter's authorship. The title might suggest that the entire chapter derives from Crichton's Cosmetica. However, this interpretation is difficult to maintain, since Aetius also includes into the chapter a passage attributed to Alcigenes of Aponea. This makes the authorship of the material following Alcigenes' fragment uncertain. Therefore, it seems likely that only the 6 deodorant prescriptions preceding the fragment of Alcigenes can be attributed to Crichton. Let us now turn to the title of the chapter, whose first word, that is cataplasmata, raises an interpretative difficulty. In order to determine whether the term reflects the actual contents of the chapter, we should compare the meaning of the word with the information concerning the form and the application of the cosmetics described in the chapter. So the term cataplasmata originates from the verb cataplasso, which means to put on a poultice, a dressing. However, all detailed prescriptions included in chapter 7, which can be attributed to Crichton, refer not to poultices, but powdery substances obtained by means of pulverizing and sieving multi-ingredient pills. In the chapter, almost every such powder was termed catapaston, which is in fact telling, since it is an adjectivum verbale, not from the verb cataplasso, but of catapasso, which means to sprinkle down on, to pour down on, to powder with. Moreover, in the same chapter, the verb passo appears in its different prefixed variants, and we can encounter them in the passages such as didu diapasestai lutromenos, that is, give to the bathers so that they could powder themselves, or chro meta to lutron epipasson kai atribon to stopus, that is, use after the bath, powdering and rubbing the appropriate places. The above arguments strongly suggest that the original reading was cataplasmata therina, that is, powders that should be used in summer, rather than cataplasmata therina. In the discussed chapter, Aetius of Amida provides the reader with prescriptions for deodorants classified according to the strength of their action. The first prescription marks the beginning of the category of the so-called therina, that is, preparations apparently intended for the use during summer. A characteristic feature of this group was the inclusion of a substance called Stypteria gra, which can probably be identified as a form of alum. Since Stypteria was well known for its styptic properties, we might presume that it was intended to constrict the pores of the skin and thereby reduce the excessive perspiration to which people were particularly prone during the summer months. The fact that the third recipe in the sequence bears a heading Ewodes prosenes, so a deodorant of mild action, suggests that it introduces another category of preparations, which may be termed prosene. In contrast to the preceding therina, these remedies appear to have been defined primarily by mildness of their action rather than their seasonal application. They may therefore have been intended for use during periods when milder deodorizing action was considered sufficient, rather than specifically for the hottest part of the year. This interpretation is supported by the fact that the prescriptions lack stypteria, and that their deodorizing action was based exclusively on plant ingredients, which suggests that they produced a milder effect than therina. Today, we will examine the first formula for Ewodes prosenes. The preparation of deodorant required 40 drops of fresh rose petals, 8 ounces of troglodytic myrrh, Illyrian iris, nard, and cassia cinnamon. In all probability, all the substances were to be carefully crushed in the mortar to finally be combined with fragrant wine. The resulting mass was then formed into pills. Although the text of the formula does not mention it explicitly, a comparison with other prescriptions in the same chapter suggests that the pills were subsequently dried in the shaded place. The prescription further states that before use, the pills were crushed and sieved. The resulting powder was then sprinkled over the body and rubbed into the skin before being finally washed off with cold water. From analogous prescriptions, we learn that such preparations were usually used in a bathhouse. When it comes to the cosmetics action, the evidence of ancient and Byzantine materia medica suggests that its effectiveness was based primarily on the styptic properties of rose petals, further enhanced by cassia cinnamon. It seems that the substances were thought to constrict the pores of the skin and thereby reduce perspiration. Furthermore, perspiration was likely diminished by strong desiccative properties of cassia cinnamon, supported by more moderate desiccative action of myrrh and spikenard. Finally, all of the ingredients listed in the prescription contributed not only to the therapeutic effectiveness but of the preparation, but also to its fragrance. Thus, the deodorant was designated both to reduce perspiration and to impart the pleasant scent to the body. As you may have noticed, the two discussed prescriptions have in common more than just the use of aromatic substances. Several similarities can be observed in their preparation. In both cases, the crushed aromatic ingredients were first formed into flattened discs or compact pills and then dried in a shaded place. The rationale behind this procedure deserves closer attention. One possible explanation is that the preparation had to be thoroughly dried in order to improve their preservation and prevent spoilage. Such drying may have required prolonged exposure to air, which could in turn have weakened the fragrance of the ingredients. Forming the aromatic mass into compact units before drying would have reduced the amount of the preparation forming their surface and thus being directly exposed to the environmental factors, in proportion to the rest of the preparation's volume used to make a pill or a disc, thereby helping to preserve the cosmetic scent while still allowing it to dry internally to be ready for a longer period of storage. Furthermore, attention should be drawn to the recommendation that this type of preparations ought to be dried in a shaded place. This detail may indicate that the physicians were aware of the detrimental effect of direct sunlight on aromatic substances. At the same time, they appear to have recognized that drying in the shade allowed for slower and more even desiccation of the preparations. Such a procedure would have improved their preservation and reduced the risk of deterioration, including mold growth. The analysis of the sources demonstrates that although both preparations were ultimately applied in the powdered form, the deodorants were stored as pills and were crushed and sieved immediately before use. One possible explanation for this practice is that prolonged storage of a powdered form would have accelerated the loss of fragrance. Moreover, finely ground substances are particularly susceptible to absorbing moisture from the air, which may lead to lump formation and deterioration of their texture. Storing the preparation as compact pills could therefore have helped preserve both its aromatic qualities and its physical integrity. The face cleanser, by contrast, was stored in the powdered form. This difference may be explained by the storage conditions described in the recipe, which specifies that the preparation was kept in a glass vessel. Such a container, if tightly sealed, may have offered better protection against atmospheric humidity and consequently against lump formation. It may also have reduced the loss of volatile aromatic compounds during storage. It is also worth noting that both chapters, in which the discussed preparations are embedded, contain the information which may be interpreted from the perspective of social history. With regard to this aspect, it is worth considering the evidence concerning the gender of the intended uses of these preparations. In the case of cleansers, important clues are provided by the titles of some of the recipes. Preparations such as Smegma Cleopatra's Basilisces, that is cleanser of Queen Cleopatra, and Sapon o Chresato Pelagia Patricia, so a cleanser or a soap used by a patrician Pelagia, explicitly associate these cosmetics with women. Although no comparable indication is found in the analyzed prescription for Nyma prosopou, an evidence provided by a related preparation entitled Nyma Thomasium Apokathyron ten opsin kai lamprinon, so a cleanser wonderfully cleansing and brightening the face, which Aetius includes in book 16 of his Libri Medicinales. Since this book is devoted entirely to women's health and well-being, it is plausible to assume that preparations described as Nymata prosopou were primarily intended for women. Taken together, the available evidence suggests that facial cleansers of this type were chiefly associated with female users. The evidence concerning deodorants is somewhat different. In the introduction to the chapter on cataplasmata, Aetius explicitly states that the preparations should be used not only by women, but also by men. This passage clearly indicates that deodorants were intended for both sexes. At the same time, the fact that women are mentioned first may suggest that they constituted a particularly important group of users and that the use of such preparations were especially closely connected with female cosmetic practices. Finally, the contents of the chapter, which contain the analyzed recipes, allows us to formulate certain observations concerning the social profile of the users of the discussed cosmetics. The repeated association of cleansers and deodorants with the bathhouse suggests that they form part of a broader bathing routine. Such practices required not only access to bathing facilities, but also a considerable investment of time. This is particularly evident in the recipe for one of the cleansers, which was to remain on the skin for an hour before being washed off. The application of the described preparations was probably only one element of more complex hygienic procedure. It therefore seems likely that these cosmetics were used primarily by individuals who could devote part of their day to extended bathing and grooming practices. Moreover, since public bathhouses were predominantly an urban institution, the users of the cleansers and deodorants described in Libri Medicinales were probably drawn chiefly from urban communities. The discussed prescriptions also provide valuable insight into the economic status of their users, and they contain a number of exotic substances imported from regions situated beyond the core of the territories of the Greco-Roman world. These include nard, whose origin was traditionally associated with India, as well as cassia, cinnamon, frankincense, and myrrh, which, according to ancient and Byzantine authors, were native to Arabia Felix. We have already discussed some of the reasons behind the high price of frankincense. So let us now look at myrrh to see more broadly why imported aromatics were such costly commodities. The deodorant prescription contained in the analyzed chapter demonstrate that several varieties of the resin were available on the market, which most probably differed in quality and consequently in price. For instance, in the discussed recipe, Aetius recommends the use of troglodytic myrrh, which, as we learn from another passage of Libri Medicinales, he regarded as the finest variety of the resin. This particular kind of myrrh was associated exclusively with the region of Troglodytica, and since the best class of the myrrh was believed to originate only from this relatively restricted area, its availability was probably more limited than that of other kinds of myrrh. Such exclusivity likely contributed to both the prestige and high market value of troglodytic myrrh. Although no direct evidence for the market value of myrrh, regardless its species, has survived from Aetius' lifetime, an indication of its prestigious character may be found elsewhere in Libri Medicinales, namely, in the recipe for a medicament which helped to make hair thinner. Aetius includes myrrh to the group of substances affordable exclusively to the rich. This association may indicate that in his time, myrrh was regarded as a costly and prestigious commodity, and that cosmetics containing it were particularly associated with affluent customers. Even though the formulas enriched with myrrh and other exotic substances were primarily aimed at the requirements of the higher social classes, it does not mean that other residents of the Mediterranean lacked easy access to antiperspirants and cleansers. As for the former, from the fragment by Antyllus, preserved in Oribasius's Collectiones Medicae from the 4th century AD, we learn that there existed a practice of deodorizing the body by means of simple and widely available substances, such as, for example, pulverized dried myrtle, pomegranate husk, or starch. Although such preparations lacked the expensive fragrance found in luxury cosmetics, their properties were nevertheless considered sufficient to ensure effective reduction of perspiration. As far as bodily cleansers are concerned, in the Alimentorum Facultatibus, Galen describes broad bean flour as an exceptionally effective cleansing substance, which was used both by slave traders for hygienic procedures performed on slaves and by poor women in their daily washing routines. One should note that broad bean flour appears in 4 of the 10 scrap recipes included in the analyzed chapter from Libri Medicinales. The fact that it was required in cleansers containing costly ingredients, such as frankincense, suggests that in Aetius of Amida's time, its inclusion was valued for more than its affordability, and that it continued to be regarded as an effective cleansing agent. And finally, in conclusion, the analyzed prescriptions allow us to make several observations concerning the role of costly aromatic substances in cleansers and deodorants, and more broadly, the social and economic context of their use. First, the recipes demonstrate that ancient and Byzantine physicians possessed considerable knowledge of the medical properties of a wide range of imported aromatics. This knowledge enabled them to employ these substances not only for their fragrance, but also for their cosmetic properties. Furthermore, detailed instructions concerning the preparation and storage of the cosmetics suggest an awareness of the impact of environmental conditions on the durability and fragrance of such preparations. Secondly, the analyzed material illustrates the continuity of cosmetic knowledge between antiquity and early Byzantium. Aetius's preservation of the recipes borrowed from Crichton indicates that both the cosmetic formulas and the practical knowledge connected with their preparation and use remained relevant centuries after their original compilation. Finally, the prescriptions demonstrate that medical treatises can provide valuable evidence for social and economic history. The existence of both costly care products and their inexpensive alternatives suggests that concerns about bodily cleanliness and unpleasant odors were shared across different social groups. At the same time, the inclusion of imported aromatics, such as frankincense and myrrh, indicates that for affluent customers, hygienic cosmetics could serve purposes extending beyond personal care. By incorporating prestigious imported aromatics, such preparations became a means of expressing social distinction and economic status through scent. The analyzed cosmetics therefore reveal that in early Byzantium, the pursuit of bodily freshness and the display of luxury were not separate phenomena, but closely interconnected aspects of everyday self-care. And we would like to thank you for your attention. And if you would like to get some further information on cosmetics in antiquity and Byzantium, we invite you to enter our Centrum Ceraneum YouTube, where you can find more information on the subject. Thank you very much.